Gentlemen, this is Democracy Manifest.
I also wanted to test something with this in terms of the video. So I had an idea. I don't know if it would actually work for in-person chats, but at least for these ones, the audio isn't going to be perfect, but just for YouTube, I was wondering if I could just cut up the whole session.
The YouTube version is just a entire video of it.
Yeah. So it's not going to be as edited or like have, I guess, I don't know. I'll figure out a way to do the intro music and whatnot. But
so we're streamers now.
Yeah, this is now a streaming podcast. So if you're watching this on YouTube, welcome. This is breaking territory. And if you're listening to this, hopefully everything is still sounding the same, despite. So look, a little bit of context. We normally like to start these with how our day has transpired, and what our day was like, I think, is pretty much irrelevant because we've been trying to get this. We should be wrapping up the music news about.
Yeah, we should. And I'm just looking at this going, shit, we need to start recording because I bloody, as always, I'm making grand ambitions of getting to bed at a reasonable time. And
Likewise.
Yeah. So here we find ourselves.
Not happening. So we've been trying to start this for about an hour, and we're only now sort of starting to record. We don't really have this properly mapped out either, what we're going to be talking about for the news. So hopefully, no, we never do, but hopefully this is not a disaster because, yeah, it has been a disaster so far. All right, so I'm actually going to start this with just a very quick update on last week's news. You might remember we spoke about NDIS funding being cut from music and art therapy. Bill Shorten, who is the minister to the NDIS, I don't know if that meeting actually went ahead. I assume it did, that we talked about, but he has paused that decision. So it was going to be, from memory, as of February next year, it was going to be cut. That's no longer happening. So anyone who is currently using the scheme will be able to continue using the scheme for the foreseeable future. And the government are now going to look at other revenues to try and make the program a little bit more, give it a bit more longevity, because they were saying that there was no evidence to support it. There was a lot of outcry around it. And they're going to continue NDIS funding for the foreseeable future.
Which is great. And some very legitimate questions about where they sought their evidence from. And I think when the backlash came, they thought, well, we better actually do this a bit more thoroughly. And so at least they're doing that. At least they've responded, no doubt due to the pressure from Homebrewed. But no, it is genuinely very positive to see. And like, for what it's worth, we don't see enough of governments going, hey, all right, we might have stuffed up here. Let's run it back and have another look. So kudos to anyone who can be in a position of power and do that, because they seem few and far between.
Yeah, just governments listening in general, I think, seems to be a little bit few and far between. But yeah, positive news all round, I think, on that one. But we are going to dive in.
Sorry? I didn't want to change my camera input to camo.
Oh, yeah, go for
can't.
it. Oh, while we're recording.
Yeah, sorry.
That's all right. 2 secs.
We did put a lamp on in that time, but like to be honest,
okay, I was going to say, like, that is ridiculous. So anyone who might be watching this video, if it is actually now going out as a standalone video, you'll see the difference and you'll go, oh my goodness, I can actually see Eamon.
I'll tell you what, that 2014 MacBook camera felt really good when I got it, back when MacBooks, do you remember MacBooks had that photo studio app? Yeah, and it was like had the red curtains on it. You could open it and put the fun filters on. That was amazing back then. Nowadays, it looks like it was, taken through a fly screen. So yeah, we kind of win some and you lose some. But I will make this laptop work until it combusts. That is my promise to myself, to you, Cam, and to anyone listening.
And it almost has combusted a couple of times too. So we're nearly there.
Has indeed. But sorry, before we derailed, Cam, you're about to take us somewhere. So let's go there.
I was just going to take us to potential conspiracy land, which is where we're going to head for the first. We don't typically dive into conspiracy theories, but this one seems a little bit fun.
It's fun and like actually ties into what we spoke about in the last music news as well in some kind of way. That last music news we were speaking specifically about the Drake and Kendrick Lamar beef and the allegations that Drake has made via a couple of lawsuits. One of those was suggesting that Universal Music, his own label, was it's not artificial, but was inflating the amount of streams that Kendrick Lamar's Not Like Us got at the expense of Drake. They were like kind of bumping up the song's relevance due to a deal that they'd struck with Spotify. And so depending on, whether that's true or not, we don't know. But what we do know, and what Cam brought to my attention after a Mariners game a couple of weeks ago, and we were chatting in the street, having a homebrewed meeting, as we often do, he said that because Sabrina Carpenter did so well in the Spotify Wrapped 2024, there was a lot of theories out there suggesting that, well, was her music forced upon people? And what this immediately reminded me of was that U2 album. Anyone who owns an iPhone or iTunes, I think it was, would know what I'm talking about. I want to say it was like 2010, and U2 released an album, struck a deal with Apple, and Apple put that U2 album into the library, the iTunes library of every iTunes user on the planet, whether you wanted it or not. And this was back in the day we used to buy albums off iTunes. So it was a free album, which, was good if you liked U2. But the fact was a lot of people were like, I don't want this. What? You can't put this in my library without me consenting. This is not cool. And so it kind of blew back up in their face. But what I'm getting at and what is being suggested here is that specifically for Sabrina Carpenter, for artists I've seen Chappell Roan, Billie Eilish, and even Taylor Swift mention, when the Wrapped results came out and we saw these artists quite right up there at the top, it arced back to some theories that have been going around suggesting that people who were listening to songs completely unrelated, artists completely unrelated, genres completely unrelated, were in their kind of shuffle or discover function being then suggested or having played to them songs by these big global pop megastars that really didn't align with their taste or what they were listening to on that particular day.
Yeah, so if you were listening to Elvis Presley, you would think the algorithm would feed you something a little bit closer to Elvis, or, you're listening to Metallica or something, but the next song, more often than not, as the theory goes, was Espresso by Sabrina Carpenter. And this was back in, I think, April is what they're talking about when the song was first released. But before we completely go down there, I want to quickly dive back to the U2 thing. So I've just done a quick Google search. 2014 it was, not in 2010 as you first thought. And what I love is there is a, on the Apple support community thread, a post from April 2024. How do I stop Apple from downloading that U2 album forever? The album is horrible. I would not let them download it to my iTunes. Now, this was also part of the problem. So I can't believe it was like this year someone posted about it, which is still quite funny to me. But the other thing with that, the timing was iTunes shifted to Apple Music as well. I think it was around that time, and they deleted like your personal library of music, more or less. So it was a whole shifting of, and this is actually around the time when I thought, screw it, I'll get a Spotify account.
Yeah,
because I had my whole library on iTunes. I purchased CDs. I ripped them into my library. I had, bought singles, and there was probably a little bit of LimeWire related activities as well. Into my iTunes library. What's the how long can I admit to a crime before?
I was
Anyway,
going to say, are you admitting to illegal downloading? I think there'd be a long backlog in the courts if they chose to pursue every single one of those people, myself included. But yeah, I mean,
I've got you involved now too.
We're on the lam.
Yeah. So, but the point I'm making is that whole library disappeared and then they forced everyone effectively to what is now the Apple Music or Spotify method. But at the time, it was like, well, no, why have you forced this upon us? Not just the U2 album, but also this new way of having your library sorted. I didn't like it, so I sold my iPhone. I purchased a Samsung, and then I installed Spotify on my Samsung. Now, I know I could have just installed Spotify on my iPhone. I understand that. But this was my way of protesting against the system and Apple, was to sell my phone secondhand, which they would not have had any recollection of. The phone was still being used, but not by me. That was how I was making it make sense in my head. And now I'm back on the iPhone train. And even earlier this year on this very podcast, I talked about potentially ditching Spotify and going to Apple Music. So it's come full circle.
You actually did. But there hasn't been a suggestion of going back to Samsung, I will say. So I think you're embedded into the Apple ecosystem now, if not the streaming ecosystem. But yeah, it's. I mean, and also it's interesting. We'd probably have listeners that don't quite that doesn't gel with them because they're adult or adolescent and adult music listening has kind of all been via streaming. But yeah, it was a bit convoluted for a few years back when we were kind of teenagers, early teens. But anyway,
Fun time.
We digress. The conspiracies were that Spotify was kind of throwing these songs at artists, and payola is a term that's been thrown around. Now, payola is a term that was actually used for radio, used to describe when a record label would pay a radio station to play its music, which still goes on, absolutely. And it's funny, the artists that I mentioned before, Taylor Swift, Sabrina Carpenter, Billie Eilish, Chappell Roan, those were the ones on our other music news when I was carrying on about commercial radio and how much it annoys me that they play the same songs all the time. It was those same songs that were being played on commercial radio constantly. So, you know, I wouldn't be surprised if there was a payola going on there, which is completely above board. It's just how that side of the industry works. What is a bit more murky, though, is whether or not this is actually occurring on our streaming platforms. And while we can't actually, you know, sign, seal, deliver the conspiracy theory that, yeah, we were being fed that, we do know that Spotify in 2020 introduced a pretty controversial new feature that's called Discovery Mode. And that Discovery Mode allows artists to forego a portion of their royalties in order to receive a boost in algorithm-led zones of the app, such as autoplay, queue, radio, and mixes. So it's not exactly a payola type setup. However, it is definitely muddying the waters there. And Discovery Mode still exists, right? It was introduced in 2020. It still exists. If you're an artist and you can reduce your 0.003% of a cent share to 0.0015 in order to be put in front of more people effectively. It's not really known how widely it's been used or what kind of success people were getting from it or artists were getting from it. Spotify reckons that on average, artists see 50% up in saves and up 44% in user playlist ads, up 37% in follows during the first month. But yeah, that's what Spotify is saying. Those metrics are tied to their ecosystem. So it's hard to know whether or not it's actually resulting in benefits for artists. Now, from an artist perspective, you could say, well, they don't earn much to begin with. Let's just sacrifice a bit of coin to get in front of more people and hopefully build a bit of a groundswell of support. But what we're getting at with all this is regardless of what they're doing and whether these conspiracies are true, this system does exist. And there are algorithms that feed us music, and the algorithms are like every algorithm at the moment and forever. They're very, very opaque. We don't really know what is going on with them, how they're determined, and what they mean. And when that relates to your music listening, I think it just makes you wonder about how we're being influenced and how we're being fed music, regardless of having to land on whether a conspiracy theory is true or not.
Yeah, because the the Spotify algorithm, like they talk about, they have a different algorithm for the different modes. So Smart Shuffle, for example, that's something where they will queue new songs to a playlist you've already made, while the personalized Discover Weekly, as we're all aware of, it'll sort of tailor it more to your music taste and what you've been listening to recently. There's also the day lists, which is all algorithm based, as well as the AI DJ X, which uses it based on taste profiles as well. And then Spotify Radio is its own thing as well. So they have different algorithms, but they all sort of serve the same purpose. You mentioned payola before. It's actually illegal, at least in the United States, for streaming services to operate on the payola method. So the way it's explained, so record labels, if they were paying Spotify for streams, it wouldn't technically be payola because there are US laws against it, or at least the practice of paying a radio station to play a specific song without disclosing the payment only applies to public airwaves. The reasoning for this is there is a finite amount of bandwidth for radio, so they have to be managed in the public interests. The internet, on the other hand, is capable of disseminating virtually limitless data, and therefore the payola laws don't apply. So in theory, anyone can build a Spotify competitor and queue up whatever songs they desire. Spotify does offer a version of pay to play that's theoretically available to artists who opt in, which was what you're talking about, that sort of debuted in 2020. So payola in itself is illegal in the US because it's on the internet and not via radio waves. But yeah, they are getting around it a little bit. So I don't know if that did clear it up for anyone, but I thought I'd just offer that explanation just in case you were confused as to how they were getting away with this new method if payola was illegal. Maybe you heard it was illegal and maybe you thought that we were talking nonsense, which we normally do. But maybe that's just a little bit of a breakdown, which might help explain it a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, we are largely dealing with a lot of hypotheticals here because we don't actually know. We don't really have the data or information on this. But I suppose where I land with this is and it's like everything, and the same argument could be made for radio 20 years ago, 30 years ago. So this could just be, Eamonn yelling at Cloud in the same way that if Eamonn was a radio guy 20 years ago, he'd be yelling at Cloud about the same thing. But we have this this service that we all use, streaming services, and they create this illusion of choice. Or it's not an illusion insofar as you can choose what you want to listen to, but algorithmically, we are fed things that are determined by something. And the fact that that something could be influenced is not surprising, and whether or not it is being influenced, if it was, it's also not surprising. If it was being influenced, it's not surprising. But we innocently enter these apps, we innocently use these algorithms, expecting it to just tailor things based to our taste. But we could inadvertently be contributing to the rise of an artist whose very upturn was manufactured, or algorithms are feeding us these things. And what I'm really interested in is, again, and I keep going back to this, how interesting it is in terms of what these streaming services are doing to influence how people listen to music now and how music is consumed. Because we speak at length to bands who change the way they release because of streaming services. Albums are not as important anymore. Singles are more important. You don't have to release bodies of work, etc., etc. We don't listen to bodies of work as much as we used to. We listen to singles now. That's something that's come as a result of streaming. But the fact that it could now be very much influencing the artists that we listen to, and not in a way that we really understand or know or are conscious or consenting to, is also very interesting. And I guess, I mean, like, I love the Discover Weekly feature in Spotify. I love that it does send me awesome music that I really, really like, that's kind of tailored to my taste. That's an algorithm that benefits me. But it does seem like there are a lot of people out there who are questioning other algorithms and whether or not they're being used in other ways.
Well, again, yeah, this is the thing, right? Like, at what point ultimately, I guess it's a question for Spotify about the user experience, right? If they continue to push artists because of this algorithm or because of this payola, not payola method, if they continue to do that and it's not in people's music tastes, will people get fed up and potentially make the jump to Apple Music or to Pandora or a different streaming service? Or like how, because it all depends on the user experience ultimately, I believe. Like personally, the way I use Spotify and the way that I engage with, I guess, or the algorithm engages with me, I didn't have espresso coming up on all of my stuff. However, if it did, I also probably wouldn't have cared too much because I don't dislike the song. However, if it came on and it was let's throw Shabuzi under the bus and it was Tipsy Bar Song that was coming up all the time, I might get a little bit more annoyed. Poor Shabuzi. But I might get a little bit more annoyed at that. And if that was happening repetitively, I would go, what the fuck is Spotify doing? I don't like this song. And then I would get annoyed at Spotify. And then, you know, the user experience is down. Therefore, maybe I'm not using it as much as I would be. Like, do you understand what I'm saying? I think it's now a question that if enough people, it's a matter of what song it is and then how people react to that will ultimately, potentially, if Spotify do anything different about it, that would be the reason why, because people are going, no, I don't want to hear Shabuzi after every time I play a song or whatever the case is.
And it's you're exactly right, and it speaks to this whole idea of the rot economy, which I think I've spoken about on this podcast before. It's like the concept I've been most fascinated with in 2024, I reckon, and it's literally that idea that, you know, again, we're speaking in hypotheticals. We don't know whether or not this is happening for sure, but there's a lot of anecdotal evidence to suggest something of that nature may be occurring, whether or not it's, you know, as clear cut as we think, or whether it's a bit less that. But this idea, and we've seen it, I think everybody can relate to it, where these online tech services, the user experience deteriorates. It gets worse and worse and worse, because it's not about providing the best user experience. It's about maximizing profits. So the more advertisements Instagram can fit into your feed, the more money it makes. But we're so entrenched in the ecosystem that we're not going anywhere. And they walk a really fine line between decreasing the user experience on their platform and therefore maximizing their profits. The same thing happens. Google search results do not feel as helpful as they once did. Gumtree, I literally cannot use anymore. It's just like a bunch of trash. Facebook, similar. Like all of these platforms used to function a lot better, and now the user experience is worse. It's more congested with ads, things you didn't ask to see, because they found a way to make it them. And if this is going on, this is Spotify doing the same thing. And as you say, Cam, they're going to walk that line between decreasing the user experience to a point where people aren't still going to leave.
And like Twitter, Facebook, you mentioned Facebook. If I didn't need Facebook to post on our social pages, or like for work, I need it as well because I need to access the Meta account and yada, yada, yada. If I didn't need to, I wouldn't use it. The only reason I think I Messenger and the occasional marketplace. Otherwise, I do not ever check Facebook. And Twitter, oh my goodness, wasn't that a fall from grace when our friend Elon Musk took over everything? I don't use it anymore. I've still got the app technically, but it's not on my home screen, so I'm not just mindlessly scrolling anymore because I hated the experience. So now I've actually gone back to Threads and Blue Sky. I'm sort of alternating between the two. So the problem is you don't necessarily have the user base on either of those platforms. And then also, there's now a little bit of competition around that space where previously Twitter just had the domination on everything, similar to, I guess, what Spotify has now. They have by far the biggest market share. So unless there's other competitors out there who can entice people to join that platform, the user experience can really suffer until we get that happening, because no one's going to leave Spotify because there are so many features like the algorithms that we do like. They're not all terrible. And of course, your Spotify Wrapped, which we will talk about in a little bit as well. Like that is a huge feature why people stay on Spotify too.
Yeah, 100%. But at this point, I'm begging. Like, come on, show me something better. If someone's out there making a new platform, give it to me, because there's more and more things that are just making you shake your head with this stuff. But it is super interesting how
Question
this
for you.
story hit me.
Would you pay more per month to a service that pays artists more
Hands
per
down,
stream?
absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I feel like that is a lot of people would be in the same boat. Not everyone. Obviously, there were some people who go, no, it's too expensive. I'm not doing that, regardless of the user experience, because I understand times are tough. But I am like you. I would rather, if the service is good, the user experience is good, and the artists are getting paid more fairly, then it feels like an absolute win-win. And I would happily lose some of the algorithm and the Spotify Wrapped and all of the other benefits that come with having a Spotify account.
Yeah, if you knew you were putting more money in the pockets of artists. I know Apple Music does pay them more per stream, so that's potentially one pool for that. And I have always bounced around that ethical thing, but again, it's all still pennies. It's not much for the artist, is at least how I justify it to myself. But if there was some way where I knew that, like this was actually making a meaningful difference, and instead of paying $12 a month, whatever, you pay $25 a month. I mean, people pay $30 a month for various subscription services all the time. Of course, times are tough, and that wouldn't be expected on everybody. But if you're in a position to pay that more each month, knowing it would end up in the artist's pocket, then I think it's a no-brainer. And like the wrapped concept, it can be replicated. Other streaming platforms can do. I think Apple Music do their own version of it.
They do. They also do a monthly version as well, so you have more than just the big one at the end of the year. But the hiccup that stopped me, you might remember, well, one of the issues, reason why I didn't leave Spotify to go to Apple Music when we talked about it earlier in the year, was because I have such a big library of music and playlists and everything on Spotify, and there is no easy way, I think, other than using a third-party service to put that all across to Apple Music. Yeah. You hear people say that the sound quality on Apple Music's better. Obviously, they do pay artists a little bit more than Spotify, but it is a massive effort to get it across. And then also, the algorithm and, all the other benefits that do come with having a Spotify account. But if the user experience does continue to decline by them doing deals with labels and pushing music upon you that, wouldn't, if it's normally going to be in my algorithm, I couldn't care less. If I like the song, do what you got to do. But if they're pushing me music that I'm not enjoying, and they would know that based on my listening habits and what the algorithm would typically feed me, they're giving me something outside of that, and diminishing the user experience, then maybe I'll have to actually revisit it. Christmas holidays are coming up. Maybe it's a good time to sit there and spend 2 days copying across my playlists and libraries to a new service.
I'm sure there's a way, but this is the thing that's also bonkers about. I mean, and we've all accepted it, and we've all voluntarily entered into this. For the convenience of streaming, we have kind of foregone actual ownership of music, because the minute you stop paying your Spotify or your streaming service monthly fee, every song you have in your library is not accessible anymore. Whereas you used to buy things and own them, and I had an experience with a song where they changed the song retrospectively. I don't know if it was a copyright or whatever, and the part that they changed fundamentally changed the song. And the only way I can find that original version is some far corners of the internet now, but you're never going to listen to it that way. So there's all these things that we've kind of slowly given away. We don't really own music anymore, and we're kind of stuck into this contract with these services. And even as you say, Cam, if you want to change, you've got to confront the idea of somehow migrating all of this music over to another platform, which you've amassed over years of listening, which isn't easy at all. But what I think is interesting, and maybe to round this segment out, this part of the conversation out, is that what we spoke about with Kendrick and Drake and the beef the other week does directly relate to this, because this is effectively what Drake was suggesting, that there was a deal struck between record labels and Spotify to inflate or put in front of people Kendrick Lamar's Not Like Us. And if that goes to court and it's not settled, if we actually do get information, like that could be the case that kind of tells us, okay, this is happening or this is not. So it's very funny that the rap beef could blow this thing wide open. But I suppose Drake has sympathizers out there, those who were getting Sabrina Carpenter put into their feed without them asking. Maybe there were people who were getting Kendrick Lamar's Not Like Us put into their feed without them asking, and maybe that's going to be the thing that kind of exposes it all. We don't know. It's all remained to be seen, but it is a funny connection between those two stories.
Yeah, it could be. And just, sorry, one quick, I know you were trying to move away, but just one other quickly thing. Another thing that's tethering me to Spotify is I have a duo account with my wife. So if I want to leave Spotify, I also need to convince her to go through the exact same process and join Apple Music or whoever we decide to go with. So I don't know if it was part of their plan, because when you're on paper, you go, well, I'm paying for Spotify, you're paying for Spotify. Let's just do a duo account, and that way we can pretty much halve our costs. And then you're like, oh, yeah, they're bastards. They've got us both now.
But that's right. I'm in a family Spotify account with my housemates, and we have like 5 of us on it, and it costs like $6 a month. So I'd be in the same boat, I think, if I wanted to bounce.
Yeah, it's difficult, but yeah, there's certainly. I don't think this is the last we're going to hear about this sort of behavior with labels paying streaming services and, you know, algorithms and, you know, artists taking slightly less money but then making their song appear in more places as well. So I don't think that's the last we'll hear of it. We mentioned Spotify Wrapped. Do we want to talk about that now, since we've been not talking down or badly about Spotify? If anything, we've been saying we can't leave your service because we enjoy so many features, but also do not let the user experience slide too much. But one of the reasons why a lot of people do literally have a Spotify account is because they are obsessed with Spotify Wrapped. They have turned it into a big cultural phenomenon. I even saw they even turned it into somewhat of an event. Like they were holding an event somewhere in Sydney, which feels strange to me. But Spotify Wrapped, it came out in early December, which was about a week later than it had been the last few years. It was annoying my wife, actually. She was refreshing her Spotify every morning going, where's my Wrapped? Where's my Wrapped? So it eventually came. And in Australia, any guesses who you think maybe the top Aussies who were streamed globally might have been?
Vance Joy, Riptide. If the ARIA charts are anything to go off.
Fred Again and Dom Dollar.
Oh, okay. Fred Again makes a lot of sense.
Some of the biggest exports out of Australia. So I guess that sort of shows.
But Fred Again's not an Australian artist.
No, sorry. So in Australia, Fred Again and Dom Dollar were sort of the two of the biggest in Australia, showing, I guess, dance music now becoming massive in Australia. The Kid Laroi, he was apparently the most newly discovered Australian artist by global audiences. Any guesses which country streamed the most Aussies outside of Australia?
New Zealand?
No, USA.
Oh, okay. I suppose population, that makes sense.
Yeah, followed by the UK, Germany, Canada, and Mexico.
Oh, wow. See.
Yeah. Kid Laroi was also the most streamed Australian artist in the Asia Pacific region, followed by Troye Sivan and Chase Atlantic. Who do you think was the most streamed Australian artist of the year?
So it's
I'll give you a hint. They were also the most Australian streamed artists last year.
Oh.
I don't think you'll get it.
Okay.
I will.
ACDC.
The Wiggles.
Oh. You know what? With enough guesses, we might have got there.
Which makes perfect sense when you consider the amount of parents trying to put their kids to sleep or to entertain their kids. The Wiggles are obviously, also not to mention their Re-Wiggled album that came out to appeal to people of our demographic as well. Yep. So they were the most, followed by the Kid Laroi, AC/DC, Rufus Du Sol, and Vance Joy.
Okay, he made it in there in the end.
Yeah, Riptide, still being played and showcased in a lot of Spotify Wraps in 2024, even though it was released in 2013.
Oh, well, it's an enduring song, no less. But it is.
I was gonna say, it might it might sound like we're shooting on Riptide. I think it's a very good song, and I like Vance Joy. Seems like a very good human being. This is no shade on him or that song. It just feels still very strange 11 years on to say that this is in the ARIA charts and it is in people's Spotify raps.
Yeah, it's undeniable. Like, yeah, as you said, undeniably a good song. We're not throwing shade to Vance at all. But yeah, it just feels like we're kind of stuck in a time warp where it's like no songs have been released since, when we know that's not the case. And it's, I suppose, very reflective of the state of things in terms of Australia's consumption of its own music right now. But kudos to Vance Joy for creating an enduring song like that.
Yes. We mentioned Sabrina Carpenter before. Her album Short and Sweet and Billie Eilish's Hit Me Hard and Soft were the number 2 and 3 most streamed albums in Australia. Surprise, surprise, Taylor Swift had the number 1 album most streamed. She was also the most streamed artist of the year. Most streamed song in Australia, Eamon. Any guesses?
I would say some Sabrina Carpenter again.
No, it is neither of the artists who I've mentioned so far. An artist by the name of Benson Boone.
Who?
That's what I thought too. I have heard the song though. It's this one. It's Beautiful Things.
Please.
Oh, yes.
You know it? Yeah.
I want you, I need you, oh God. Don't take these beautiful things that I've got. Please stay.
Anyway, that one was the most streamed song in Australia according to the Spotify Wrapped, which was a little bit surprising that was number 1.
Yeah, I know. I mean, like, they would have so much data based off of this. Like, you know, they're giving us some, but they would have more that would really unpack what the go is with listening habits and patterns amongst Australian fans and Australian artists as well, I suppose. But more so fans. That would be so interesting to you know, give us the key to their war room and they just shuffle through the filing cabinet and have a look. But these little tastes that we get are very, very interesting. And yeah, undeniably Wrapped is a very exciting time of the year. And when mine came out, I was like, oh my God. I've had an interesting relationship with it over the years. And this year it kind of felt like it landed on, like, it always reflects your listening. But sometimes I'd look back on my listening and go, I don't even know if I like that stuff that much. I just listen to it, you know, this weird detachment to your music. And again, this is part of what's informed my obsession with how we listen to music and how it's changing and what it all means. But this year I was very pleased to see, like, there was a bunch of Central Coast artists in mine. Characters, Tiali, Joel Leggett, Dead Shows, Jan, Porcelain Boy, even though they're not quite Central Coast, but they're kind of Central Coast. So I was very happy to have the strong Central Coast representation in my top songs for the year, and a good mix. But I will take this opportunity, and I've absolutely bored everyone who lives in my house to death with me yelling about this. But there exists a black spot, okay? And if you've listened this far, welcome. I'm going to share with you some knowledge that isn't spoken about very often. There is a black spot in Spotify.
Is this the second conspiracy theory being discussed?
It's not a conspiracy, it's fact. And you know what? The Apple Music...
Spoken like a man with a conspiracy theory.
The Apple Music monthly Wrapped that you were saying before actually would eliminate the black spot. But what I want to say to you, right? What we found out, and actually my housemate and my friend Geordie told me this, that they collect the data, it ends in like October. So it's like an October to October or October to October period each year, right? So when you get your Wrapped, it's actually an October to October thing because they need time to assess that data and, you know, put together what you end up getting on Wrapped Day, right? But what happens to the music? Okay, so October's our cutoff. What happens to the music that you're listening to maybe halfway through August, all the way through September, and then into October, and then into November? So maybe there's a collection of tracks you're loving for 3 or 4 months, but half of your listens land in the 2024 catchment period, and the next half of your listens end up in the 2025 catchment period. Now, together, those listens are enough to rocket up to the top of your Wrapped listening for one of those years. But because they're split in half, your listens are diluted between 2 years and end up not making up enough to end up in either of your Wrapped lists. So what I'm saying, and if you're listening to this, you need to listen really carefully and think about it. There is a black spot. There is a collection of songs every year that passes you by that you love, but you don't get reminded of how much you love it in your Wrapped, because the listens are split between 2 catchment periods, 2 years of listening to Spotify Wraps. I don't know what the solution is, but I know it's a problem. And thank you for listening.
I have a problem with calling it a black spot because it's not a black spot.
Why is it not?
The music is because a black spot would be if they stopped in October and then anything that happened in November and December wasn't counted. It's still counted, it's just counted to next year's Wrapped.
It's counted to next year's Wrap, but if half of your listens occurred in the year prior and then the next half in the next year, then you haven't listened enough in either of those years for it to make your list. But if you combine the two, you would have. Does that make sense?
But that's going to happen. Like you could listen to a song in December that you discover, and then again in January, if they based it on a calendar year. Like, I feel like that's always going to happen.
Oh, it's unavoidable when you have a cutoff. Like, I'm not saying that this is necessarily like I've been wronged, but I
It
do.
should be
I just
current.
We need another Spotify Wrapped for the black spots. You know, maybe they just capture that 4 months period and throw you that, or they combine it over several years and give it to you every 2 or 3 years. They call it the black.
I'll be
spot
honest.
Wrapped.
The black spot Wrapped, which isn't a black spot as far as I'm concerned. But I always just assumed that December was a black spot month. Like anything I listened to in December wasn't being counted. I almost felt like December was a freebie month to go ahead and stream, my guilty pleasure music or whatever that I don't want included on my Wrap.
Cue the wiggle.
I always thought December was a free listening month and it didn't count towards anything.
Yeah, well, no, apparently it is a full 12-month round, but the cutoff is earlier than you would expect.
There you go. So you do learn something every day.
You do.
Quickly on the Wrapped, my number one artist, no surprise, Teenage Dads. Number 2 was Middle Kids. I had Taylor Swift in at number 3. In at number 4 was Winterborn, and who I don't think released any music this year. So obviously I was still just really digging their album from last year. And number 5, I had The Moving Stills.
Wonderful.
As well. We also only one release this year, which was also in November. So according to you, in the black spot. So
It is. And I think that's going to be one of those songs for me that won't end up in either, but I'm listening to a bunch at the moment.
It should end up in next year's. It was released in November,
Actually,
and you're saying
yeah,
you go
should.
October to October. It should include in next year's based on your
That
metrics.
one should be safe, actually.
Just quickly too, obviously Spotify do podcasts as well, and you get podcast charts. In at number 5 was the Call Her Daddy podcast. Case File True Crime in at number 4. Number 3 was the Huberman Lab. In at number 2 was A Diary of a CEO with Stephen Bartlett. And no surprises, number 1 was Homebrewed, an Australian music podcast.
Roll out the red carpet, baby. Thank you very much.
And Joe Rogan Experience somehow not even charting at all. We've topped him, and then we've also just kicked him out.
We've topped him and we've toppled him. So Joe Rogan, eat our dust, mate.
He was number 1, unsurprisingly, I think. But we did actually, obviously, as people who have a podcast, we get the Spotify Creators Wrapped, I think they called it, and we got some cool stats on the amount of people who were listening to our content, how you were listening to our content. And we were in the top 5 podcast for like a good chunk of our audience, which was very pleasing. I think even the number 1 podcast for about 30% of our audience, which tells me that 30% of our audience are our parents. No. 30% of our audience listen to on our podcast.
It is genuinely lovely. And if we can kind of do a bit of a wrap up of our 2024 with a couple of minutes here, just to say that this is the year that we kind of did that transition where we weren't teeter-tattering between radio and just putting up the segments on as podcasting platforms. We've gone full commit. it's been lovely. It's been really, really good. I think both of us would agree. It's probably a format that suits us better. We've been able to kind of delve into conversations with local artists and artists from around Australia that are what we've always wanted to do, and have these really, really long, as you'd probably see by the runtime of every show. But hopefully you think so too, insightful and interesting and fun and funny conversations with artists. It's a privilege to be able to do it for the Central Coast, because there are other podcasts that do variations of it, which is fantastic, and we genuinely would welcome as many people doing this for our area as possible. But, you know, as we found out when we first started this, there wasn't really anyone doing this, and having this platform for local artists to be able to tell their story and speak. So it's nice to be able to offer that, and, you know, in a format that still is pretty unique to us in the way that we do it. So if you're still listening, you've heard my my theory. You're armed with that knowledge now, but also thank you for your support. It's been really heartening to see it throughout the year, and it's gone really, really well for us so far, and may it continue.
Yeah, genuinely, thank you. If you have been along since the radio days, and thank you if you've just discovered this podcast, maybe it was through an Oz Indie that we're there on a Thursday evening. Maybe it was just through social media. We interviewed an artist who you know, or whatever the case is. But however you have found us, and if you are listening right now, we genuinely do thank you very much for all of your support while we made the transition. As Eamonn said, it's been thoroughly enjoyable. Although, ironically, we are doing this on a Monday evening at the same time that we would currently be on air. So the flexibility that it's afforded us, you know, we're still doing some scheduling, much the same.
It's there.
No, we're at home. We're not at the studio, so there is that as well. But we do genuinely thank you for listening to us. This will be the final podcast for 2024. But yeah, plenty more still planned in 2025.
As usual, we've got a bunch of us here. We actually already have multiple interviews booked for the next year with local artists that you haven't heard from before. So we're very excited to bring those to you. And more technical difficulties in the new year. That much is guaranteed.
Plenty. And maybe when we sit here again, or maybe even the first one next year, maybe I'll be coming to you as an Apple Music listener. Although I need to find another podcasting app. That was my other problem last time as well. I use Spotify for my podcasts. I don't like some of the things that Apple Podcasts do. There's Pocket Casts and a bunch of other third parties. Anyway, that's a me problem to solve. You don't need to hear about that. Have a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to all of our listeners. Enjoy your holidays, however you do plan to spend it. Hopefully it involves a little bit of music. Maybe go on a Lost Paradise Festival on the Central Coast over New Year's as well. But we will see you next year.
Thanks for listening for the last time. Ta-ta and farewell.
Ta-ta and farewell.
For the last time for this year.